In my last Scooby-Doo video, I mentioned that after 8 incarnations, the series went into a decade-long hiatus. But with the newfound popularity in direct-to-video Scooby-Doo movies, it was inevitable that Warner Brothers would cash in on a theatrical franchise. Yet what still bothers me to this day is just how Warner Brothers' mishandling of the first live-action movie stopped it from ever reaching its full potential. So let's talk about it. The live-action Scooby-Doo franchise did not pan out the way Warner Brothers wanted it to. Neither film was critically well received, and the first film just about grossed enough money to warrant a sequel. Yet that sequel, despite releasing during the series' revival, was a commercial dud in comparison, resulting in the franchise being pulled, and half a decade later, Warner Brothers resorted to just making made-for-television movies instead. Granted, it's no surprise that some fans probably prefer the sequel over the first film because, in essence, it's much more faithful to the original series. Personally, I think Monsters Unleashed is just fine. I don't really have much to say about it, given it really just goes for nostalgic pandering, which isn't a bad thing, but it's technically a substitute for the relative ambition screenwriter James Gunn originally envisioned for the live-action adaptation. It's fun, quirky, and obviously it's cool to see all the iconic monsters come to life, but the visual motif of a museum best describes it as a gallery of fan-pleasing highlights reminiscent of the series, and that's about it.
You did that too! You're pushing your luck, Scoob!
Here's the thing. I think the first film is better. Sure, I wouldn't go as far as to call it anything special, but underneath all the studio tampering is a film that truly does try to do something different, or indeed unique with the series. While I don't blame Warner Brothers entirely for turning what James Gunn claims was originally an R-rated comedy into a family-friendly adventure because, after all, it's a kids show, it's definitely worth exploring the premise Gunn initially wrote. Scooby-Doo was actually his first major studio script. Before that, he worked for Trauma Entertainment, who made low-budget campy horror movies like The Toxic Avenger, and his only other major writing credits were a transgressive romantic comedy and a superhero comedy, which would eventually pave the way for his style of humor for anyone who saw Slither, Super, and of course, Guardians of the Galaxy. But nonetheless, Gunn always had a campy B-movie-esque quality to his writing, and when you watch how dialogue and interactions work in the Scooby-Doo film, it's very in line with the original series and even mimics the style of many 60s, 70s television shows.
Fred, what's the secret of your success? Teamwork. I do a tremendous amount of teamwork, and I always have a plan.
Yeah, my plan.
It's no revelation that several people have described the film as borderline self-parody, and that's exactly what it's supposed to be, with the biggest indicators being the subtle reference to drug use, the almost so bad it has to be deliberate performances and art direction, and of course, how they very cleverly utilize Scrappy as the main villain. I understand some purists have a problem with this, but when Tim Curry allegedly drops out of your movie because he hates Scrappy-Doo, I think you found your weakest link.
Gee, Scraps, no reason to freak out like a jerk and try to kill all humanity.
I would have gotten away with it too, if not for your meddling son of...
But there's a bigger cultural picture that becomes clear when you consider the time the film was released. Scooby-Doo released in the early 2000s, which was a period rampant with teen sex comedies, which became a very lucrative market. But it was the kind of market oversaturated with vapid, ill-conceived attempts to attract a young demographic without understanding the very culture it was trying to capitalize on. And this cultural detachment is rooted in the film's underlying theme, yes, I'm going there, where the gang are past their prime and struggling to fit in with this younger generation. I think given how unaware characters like Fred are to how cringy and out of touch they are is very prevalent throughout the movie. And it's only after being possessed do they drop their defensive, supposedly mature but still quite petty demeanors and embrace their young, free spirit antics that were lost over time, according to Velma in a flashback.
Red? Yo, the biatch was like, what? And I was like, later on.
In fact, there's a very particular scene where Fred and Velma come across an instructional video that explains societal do's and don'ts as a young adult and references the apparent hip, trendy terminology young people use, yet, ironically, it still misinterprets that youth culture, reflecting the outdated perception adults and corporations have on young people.
Let's see how the situation should be handled.
Remember, today's young people have a language all their own.
Sorry, bro.
No big whoop, dog. Yo, did you catch that new vid on the box?
True that. I'm up to snuff on all popular trends.
Word.
Now, here's the thing. As a kid, this scene went completely over my head. But as an adult, I can kinda see the statement it's trying to make about a generational divide. But the real irony is that in Warner Brothers' attempt to turn this, again, alleged R-rated comedy into a kid's cartoon, it kinda proves the scene's point. The film seems to demonstrate these cultural misunderstandings with a deliberately cringeworthy introspective that's then paradoxically reversed into a movie targeted to children by a studio that seems to completely misunderstand children in the process.
Hey, I can look at myself naked.
Oh, brother.
And as I said earlier, that also goes for those vapid misinformed movies targeted at teens that misunderstand the teen demographic to begin with. There's nothing worse than media created by people who can't empathize with their target audience. And if you want a good or, well, bad example of that, go check out Nitpix's video on 13 Reasons Why. Anyway, when James Gunn wrote the script, he claimed the intent was to update and mature the series for audiences who were probably reaching the same age as the actual characters. So in that regards, the original draft was probably significantly close to the teen comedy craze at the time, and of course that even includes the supernatural craze that was also happening, but we'll talk about that next week. In fact, according to Sarah Michelle Gellar, once the cast were signed on, the script completely changed to a family-friendly story, and scenes like Velma and Daphne kissing to switch souls were removed, and James Gunn even said that the studio removed cleavage using CGI, which, if that's true, that explains where the monster's effects budget went. You know the movie is a product of the youth cultural backdrop of the time when Weezer were even offered roles in the film but rejected. And let's not forget the little detail of the cast of actors who were all known for their performances in teen-centric comedies and horrors. I think the idea was that Gunn was drawing from how the Brady Bunch movie was adapted by taking the original characters in their 1970s style and mannerisms and placing them in a 1990s setting to play on the culture clash to make the Brady family even more dysfunctional and alien. Now, there is an argument to be said that to justify a bad movie as genuine, you simply call it satire or skew the context behind bad and lazy filmmaking as an artistic choice, kinda like using abrupt static cuts because you can't be arsed editing an organic transition. But at the same time, you can kinda see how the 60s aesthetic satirically seeps its way ever so gradually into the film. The first 5 minutes literally set the corny tone of the story, the ridiculous mayhem, and the soppy melodrama that feels so needlessly petty that it's indicative of the generic traditional sitcom. There's even something about the way the costumes seem theatrically inorganic on the actors, especially when looking at Freddie Prinze Jr., Sarah Michelle Gellar, and very evidently Linda Cardellini. You're taking these hot, photogenic young actors and putting them in silly outfits. It's kinda like the subversive effect Wet Hot American Summer did by having the original cast play younger versions of themselves, except they're clearly in their 40s, which strikingly was also originally a satire of teen sex comedies that released a year prior to Scooby-Doo, so if anything, Scooby was late to the party.
Bro? Yes, go bro.
That's the uncanny feeling this movie gives off a lot of the time. It's so incredibly accurate to the aesthetic of Scooby-Doo that it's a little jarring in contrast to the modern look of other characters. Again, playing on the displacement the gang are going through while surrounded by this younger generation. Naturally, you cannot look past how authentic Matthew Lillard is as Shaggy. Just from a technical point of view, he's truly flawless to the character, and it's no surprise Lillard would eventually take over as the voice of Shaggy once Casey Kasem retired. Although, with that said, as much as it's typical to praise both Lillard and Cardellini's performances, and seeing Gellar playing on her transition from generic blonde victim to Buffy, despite being the one cast member to get a Razzie nomination and is arguably the inferior actor of the four, I still think Freddie Prinze Jr. is woefully underappreciated in his portrayal of Fred. He completely understood the narcissism of the original Fred and embraced his self-obsessed character traits to the point that he's the largest factor in the satire.
Fred, you friggin' protoplasmic head.
I know. But I'm still the best looking protoplasm kid here, I mean.
Some of the best jokes come from his character's total lack of self-awareness, like on the plane where he's vividly reading his own book before he literally has his ego bruised when his logic fails him.
Scoob?
It's these moments where the film is at its very best, when it acknowledges its cliches and conventions and just makes fun of it, such as this scene.
Do not go into that spooky island castle.
Aha! You want me to go up to that castle.
Didn't you just hear what I said?
But you're scary. And you knew I'd do the opposite of what you said. So you told me not to go to the castle, so I would go up to that castle where you set a trap to capture me. Unless you knew I'd figure it out. So you told me not to go up to the castle, so I would think that you wanted me to go, so I wouldn't go, just like you didn't want me to.
Huh?
I'll find out what you're hiding in that castle. You watch.
What in the world?
And then you have some of the more, I guess, subtler moments, like in the spooky castle. During this scene, you have Fred's continued nonchalant bravado.
All you care about are swimsuit models.
No! Look, I'm a man of substance. Dorky chicks like you turn me on too. But you compliment.
Then there's Shaggy and Scooby's passing banter.
Look, it's plastic. What do you care? You drink out of the toilet?
So do you.
And finally, you have them casually reference how the ride was closed due to dangerous construction, until you realize just how incredibly dangerous the entire ride is. But then there's also some logical holes left unaddressed, like how did these floating sausages work because they're not attached to anything, and that tremor-looking creature seems a bit too organic and out of place to be fake. The film isn't afraid to commit to being unquestionably cartoonish. However, not all the jokes land.
Like, oh no.
Okay, that one did. I kind of look at the first live-action Scooby-Doo movie the same way I look at the 4 direct-to-video Scooby-Doo movies that preceded it. Sure, you can let your nostalgia cloud the quality issues, but at the same time, you can't let your maturity dictate your enjoyability of what are self-evidently goofy cartoons that poke fun of supernatural mysteries. I think with the asserted focus of which creative direction to go with, the first live-action Scooby-Doo movie could have been so much better in execution. Putting a generic 60s, 70s kids cartoon in the hands of a playful writer known for his sarcastic and sardonic sense of humor, and a director who made a Home Alone movie about international assassins working for a North Korean terrorist organization sounds absolutely genius in my eyes. But definitely a bad move if you want to make a bankable theatrical imitation of a popular kids cartoon that spoon-feeds cheap jokes and horrific CGI. There's definitely a conflict here that caused the original intent of the humor to be lost in Warner Brothers' attempt to recontextualize a satire into the very thing it was apparently a satire of. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching. What do you think of the new desk? I got it in IKEA and built it over the course of 5 hours. It's supposed to use 2 people, but I'm too stubborn for that, so I managed to get it done by 5 AM this morning. Here's my question to you. Who is your favourite Scooby-Doo character and why? Please leave your own thoughts in the comments below, and as always, if you want to support the show, get early access, vote on future videos, and even get the occasional bonus video, you can do so by going over to Patreon and helping me fight demonetization, because it sucks, because horror content's not frowned upon on YouTube. And until next time, follow me on Twitter, and yeah, I'll see you all very soon. Bye!